I want you to picture something. You are standing on a hotel balcony in Paris, France. It is 7 in the morning. The Seine is moving slowly below you, gold and unhurried, the way rivers move when they have been doing this for 1,000 years and have no particular reason to rush. You have a coffee in your hand, real coffee, not the kind you drink at your desk in 12 minutes between meetings. Your wife is asleep inside. The city is just waking up. You have not taken a single day off work in 6 years. And your phone is ringing. You look at the screen. It is your father-in-law, your boss, the man who has called you sport at every company Christmas party for 6 consecutive years in front of people who pretended not to notice. You answer. And in the next 4 minutes, without knowing it, he hands you everything. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Get comfortable. This one is going to take a minute, but I promise you every single second is worth it. My name is James Calloway. I am 41 years old. I grew up in a mid-sized town in Georgia called Warner Robins, the kind of place where everybody knows your father's name and your father's father's name and has an opinion about both of them. My father was an accountant. Careful, methodical, the kind of man who balanced his checkbook by hand every Sunday morning like it was a form of prayer. I studied finance at Georgia State. Graduated without drama. Got a job at a regional investment firm in Atlanta, worked there for 3 years, learned everything I could, and then got recruited by a larger firm called Whitmore Capital Group based in Savannah. That was where I met Eleanor. Eleanor Whitmore. Yes, that Whitmore. The founder's daughter. She was working in the marketing department when I arrived, which I found out later was something her father had insisted on. He believed his children should start from the bottom of his company and earn their way up, a philosophy I respected enormously at the time, and which I later understood was somewhat selectively applied. We dated for a year, got married in a ceremony at her family's estate on Skidaway Island that had more flowers than I had ever seen assembled in one location in my life. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, gave a toast that was ostensibly about Eleanor and me, and was actually about Gerald Whitmore and the legacy of Whitmore Capital Group, but I smiled through it because I was 29 years old and in love, and I had not yet learned to read the fine print on a man's character. Gerald offered me a position at the firm 3 weeks after the wedding. Vice President of Operations, corner office, significant salary, the kind of offer that looks, from the outside, like generosity, and which I understood, even then, was something more complicated than generosity. I took it, because I was good at the work, because the opportunity was real regardless of how it arrived, and because Eleanor asked me to, with a look that told me this mattered to her more than she was saying out loud. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of arriving early and leaving late. 6 years of quarterly reports and client calls and board presentations that Gerald received credit for, and which I had built from the ground up. 6 years of being called sport in public and my son-in-law in private, always with that specific emphasis that reminded everyone in the room that my position in this building was contingent on a relationship and not on merit. 6 years of 31 unused vacation days. I want to be fair to Eleanor because this story is complicated, and she is not the villain of it. Eleanor Whitmore Calloway is 38 years old. She is intelligent, genuinely funny when she is relaxed, and capable of a warmth that her public persona, polished, composed, carefully managed, does not always reveal. She grew up in a house where her father's approval was the scarcest and most valuable resource available, and she spent her entire childhood learning to position herself to receive it. That is not a character flaw. That is survival. But it meant that our marriage existed, always, in the gravitational field of Gerald Whitmore. His opinions shaped our dinner conversations. His preferences influenced our neighborhood, our social circle, our vacation choices, the few we managed to take. When Gerald suggested we buy in a particular development near his own home, we bought there. When Gerald expressed reservations about a trip to Europe Eleanor had been planning for 2 years, the trip quietly disappeared from our calendar. I noticed this. I didn't name it for a long time because naming it felt like a betrayal of a woman I loved and a disruption of a life that was, by most measurable standards, successful. But I noticed. The Paris trip was Eleanor's idea. She had been reading about it for months. A travel magazine she kept on her nightstand, certain pages turned down, certain photographs that she'd look at in the evenings with an expression that was half longing and half something I couldn't quite place. She brought it up at dinner one night in February with the careful casualness of someone who has been rehearsing the ask. "I want us to go to Paris," she said. 2 weeks. Just us. No work, no family dinners, no phone calls about quarterly projections. I looked at her across the table. At the magazine she'd set beside her glass. At the woman who had not taken a real vacation in nearly as long as I had. Book it, I said. She looked surprised. Then she smiled. The real one? The one that her public face didn't show. Just like that. Just like that, I said. 31 vacation days, Eleanor. They have to go somewhere. She booked it that night. HR approved it the next morning. Even Donna Ferris, Gerald's head of legal and the most careful woman on the 14th floor, signed off without hesitation. I made one mistake. I told Gerald at a Sunday family dinner, casually, the way you mentioned something that has already been decided. He put down his fork. 2 weeks is a long time to be away. I have 31 unused days, I said. HR has approved it. Everything is covered. He picked up his fork again. We'll see, he said. That was not reassurance, I know that now. At the time I chose to read it as reluctant acceptance. That was my only mistake in this entire story. And it was a small one. We landed at Charles de Gaulle on a Friday morning in June. Eleanor held my hand on the taxi ride into the city and pointed at everything. The boulevards, the bridges. The way the light fell differently here. Softer and more golden than Georgia light, like the sun had better manners in France. We checked into a hotel near the Seine. Small, beautiful. The kind of place that doesn't have a lobby so much as a room that makes you feel like you've arrived somewhere that was expecting you. Eleanor stood at the window of our room and looked out at the river and said, quietly, I forgot what this felt like. What? I said, not being somewhere for a reason, she said. Just being somewhere. I understood exactly what she meant. For 3 days, we did nothing that required justification. We walked. We sat at cafes and drank coffee that tasted like it had been taken seriously. We went to the Musée d'Orsay and stood in front of paintings for as long as we wanted without anyone needing anything from us. Eleanor bought a scarf from a woman on a side street near the Marais. I bought a book I couldn't read because it was in French, but the cover was beautiful and it felt like the right kind of purchase for the right kind of day. On the third evening, sitting on our balcony with wine and the Seine doing its slow, ancient thing below us, Eleanor looked at me and said, we should have done this years ago. Yes, I said. Why didn't we? I looked at her. She looked at me. We both knew the answer. We didn't say it. On the fourth day, I sent Gerald a photograph of the Eiffel Tower from our morning walk. Caption, incredible city. Wish you could see it. It was genuine. I meant it without agenda. He did not respond. On the sixth day, I had Paulette, my assistant, push 3 non-urgent client meetings to the following week. Standard procedure. Fully within protocol. The kind of scheduling adjustment that happens every day in every office in every company in the world. By day 7, I could feel something changing in the quality of Gerald's silence. Not from anything specific, just the particular atmospheric pressure of a man who was not getting what he wanted and was deciding what to do about it. Eleanor felt it too. I could tell by the way she checked her phone more carefully in the mornings. By the way she went slightly still when her mother called and spoke in a lower voice than usual. Is he calling you? I asked her one evening. She was quiet for a moment. He called Mom, she said. He's been calling Mom. I nodded. I drank my wine. I looked at the river. James, she said. Eleanor, I said. We have 8 days left. Let's use them. She looked at me for a long moment. Then something in her face settled, something that had been held tight for a long time, deciding, maybe for the first time, to release. Okay, she said. And for 4 more extraordinary days we had exactly the vacation we had always been owed. Day 8. Friday, June 13th. I was on the balcony at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand. Paris just beginning to open its eyes below me. Eleanor was asleep inside, one arm across my side of the bed, her face completely relaxed in a way it rarely was at home. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. Gerald Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Capital Group, father of my wife, the man who had been building to this call for 8 days with the patience of someone who had spent 40 years getting what he wanted through the strategic application of pressure. I answered. Gerald, I said. What in the hell do you think you're doing? His voice, 30 years of employees had rearranged themselves around that voice. It was the voice of a man who had never once had to raise it to be obeyed. Preston tells me your entire department is running on autopilot. I have 3 client calls pushed without my authorization. You're sitting in France while real work needs doing and I will not. Gerald, I said. Don't you Gerald me. I am the CEO of this company and I built it from Gerald. Quieter this time. The specific quiet of a man who has decided something. A pause. The pause of a man unused to being interrupted. "You come back today," he said. "Today. Or don't bother coming back at all, you hear me? You're done. I won't have this kind of... Are you terminating my employment?" I said, clear, calm. "The way you ask a question when you need the answer on record. You're finished," he said. "Lazy, ungrateful. I gave you everything and you're standing in France eating croissants while my company..." I laughed. Not a polite sound. Not a managed professional response. A real laugh, deep, genuine, 6 years in the making. Coming up from somewhere Gerald Whitmore had been pressing down on since the day I married his daughter. Then I hung up. Eleanor was in the doorway. She had been there long enough to hear most of it. Her face was very still. "Did he say it?" she said. "He said it," I said. "All of it." She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face, something old and complicated and slowly resolving into something simpler. She walked to me. Took the coffee directly out of my hand, drank from it. Handed it back. "So what now?" she said. I looked out over Paris. Golden, ancient, and completely indifferent to Gerald Whitmore and his 40-year kingdom. "Now we finish our vacation," I said. "And then we go home and I show your father exactly what he just did." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I had not expected. "I'll help you," she said. I looked at her. "He's been doing this my whole life," she said. Her voice was very steady. "To my mother. To every person who ever worked for him. To you for 6 years. She handed back my coffee. "I've been watching it my whole life and I am finished watching." Outside, Paris moved the way it always has. Slow, unhurried, completely uninterested in the small kingdoms of controlling men. We had 8 days left. Neither of us wasted a single one. We landed back in Savannah on a Sunday evening. I had spent the flight reviewing documents I had been quietly assembling for 18 months. Not out of paranoia, out of the same instinct that makes a careful man keep records. The knowledge that in any situation involving power and family and money, the person with documentation wins. I had performance reviews, commendations, client retention numbers that told a story Gerald had never publicly acknowledged. Email chains that showed, clearly and without ambiguity, that the decisions credited to Gerald Whitmore in 3 consecutive board presentations had originated in my office, on my computer, in my handwriting. I also had my employment contract, which I had read in full 4 times in 6 years, and which contained a clause in Section 9, subsection B, that Gerald had apparently never read at all. Any employee terminated without documented cause following 5 or more years of continuous full-time service shall be entitled to severance compensation equivalent to 2 years' full salary plus accrued benefits, and shall retain eligibility for performance bonuses accrued during the period of service. I had been there 6 years and 4 months. I also had something else. Something I had found 8 months earlier in a filing cabinet on the 14th floor while looking for a misplaced client contract. A dusty folder. Original incorporation documents from 1987. A clause buried in Section 12 that the company's current legal team had apparently never flagged. I had shown it to my personal attorney, a careful woman named Victoria Cross who worked out of a quiet office on Bull Street, and who had, when I showed her the documents, gone very still for a long moment before looking up and saying, "James, does Gerald know you found this?" "No," I said. "Keep it that way," she said. "Until you need it." I needed it now. Monday morning, I put on my best suit. Eleanor made coffee. Neither of us said much. We had said everything that needed saying on a balcony in Paris over 8 days. I drove to 1 Whitmore Plaza. Parked in my usual spot. Took the elevator to the 14th floor. Walked through the glass doors of Whitmore Capital Group at exactly 8:59 in the morning. The reception area went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something is about to happen and everyone can feel it, but no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it. My assistant Paulette looked up. Her eyes did 3 things in rapid succession: relief, panic, then the professional composure of a woman who had worked for me for 4 years and knew, from the way I was walking, that today was different. "Morning, Paulette," I said. "Mr. Calloway," she said carefully. "Mr. Whitmore called a department head meeting for 9. "Perfect," I said. I love department head meetings. Gerald was at the head of the conference table. Hank Prudhomme to his left, Gerald's shadow, his yes man, the human embodiment of institutional loyalty to whoever signed the checks. Preston Cole to his right, Carol Stanton, the board's independent director, and the only person in that room whose opinion would actually matter before the day was over, at the far end with a legal pad and the patient expression of a woman who had seen everything. Gerald looked up when I walked in. His face did not flinch. 40 years of absolute authority had given him a face that did not show surprise. What it showed instead was recalibration. The expression of a chess player watching an opponent make an unexpected move and deciding whether to be impressed or furious. He chose furious. He always chose furious. "You were terminated," he said, quiet, which was somehow worse than loud. "Over the phone," I said, "while I was on approved vacation." I poured myself coffee from the carafe in the center of the table. "This is a new blend. Did we change suppliers?" "Hank," Gerald started. "I'd like to speak with Victoria Cross," I said. "My personal attorney. She's downstairs. I'd also like Carol Stanton to remain for this conversation." I looked at Carol. She looked back at me with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this particular meeting longer than she had admitted to anyone. Gerald's jaw tightened. "Get out of my building." "In a moment," I said. I opened my briefcase. I placed 3 documents on the table: the employment contract, the performance documentation, and the incorporation papers from 1987 with Section 12 highlighted in yellow. The room went quiet. Victoria Cross walked in at that moment. I had texted her from the elevator and distributed bound copies of everything to every person at the table, with the calm efficiency of a woman who had been doing this for 28 years. Gerald stared at the documents. At Section 12, his jaw was doing that grinding thing. "This is," he started. "Legally binding," Victoria said, in the tone of someone reading a weather forecast. "I've spent 2 weeks looking for a reason to tell my client otherwise. I cannot find one." Gerald turned to me. "And here is where men like Gerald Whitmore always make their final mistake. When the walls close in, they go personal. I gave you everything," he said, loud and controlled, the voice that had made employees shrink for 40 years. "I gave you a career, a position, a future you never could have built on your own. You sat in my building for 6 years collecting a salary from my company, and now you want to stand here and—" "Dad." Every head turned. Eleanor was standing at the back of the room. She had followed me in 20 minutes earlier and sat quietly in the corner, where everyone had assumed she was one of Victoria's associates. She stood up now and walked to the center of the room with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who had been waiting her entire life to arrive at this exact moment. Gerald's face did something complicated. "I watched you do this to Mom for 15 years, Eleanor said. Her voice was completely steady. "I watched you manage her the way you manage a portfolio, tracking every expense, questioning every decision, making her feel like a liability you were generously choosing to carry." She stopped 5 feet from him. "I watched her leave because staying had become something she physically couldn't do anymore. And then I watched you spend 2 years punishing her for it." The room was absolutely silent. "You gave James this job and called him sport for 6 years, and told a room full of people he was one of the good ones. Like he needed your validation to know his own worth." Her voice never rose. That was the devastating part. It never rose. "You fired your son-in-law from Paris on a Friday the 13th because a photograph of the Eiffel Tower bruised your ego." She looked at her father, the way you look at something you have finally, after a very long time, decided to put down. "I love you because you're my father. I have spent my whole life trying to earn something from you that you were never going to give. I am done trying." She walked back to stand beside me. Carol Stanton cleared her throat, all in favor of recognizing Mr. Calloway's severance claim under the employment contract and authorizing review of the governance provisions in Section 12 of the founding documents. 6 hands. Gerald sat in silence. It didn't matter. He was already finished. The rest happened the way real consequences always happen. Not in one dramatic moment, but in accumulating weight. Gerald's personal attorney reviewed Section 12 and confirmed what Victoria had already told him. 3 former employees came forward within the week with wrongful termination claims that had been waiting for exactly this kind of momentum. The board met the following Thursday. Gerald was removed as CEO by a vote of 7-2. He resisted for 2 weeks, the resistance of a man who has confused a title with an identity. Then he stopped resisting. Because pride is expensive and he had finally run the numbers. My severance was paid in full. The governance review resulted in structural changes that Gerald had been blocking for 4 years. Carol Stanton was named interim CEO. She called me on a Thursday morning and asked if I would consider staying on in a consulting capacity while the transition settled. I thought about it for 24 hours. Then I said yes, on my terms. with a contract that Victoria reviewed line by line and which contained, notably, no clause allowing anyone to call me sport. Eleanor and I sat at our kitchen table that evening with coffee and the particular silence of two people who have been through something significant and come out on the same side of it. "What do you want to do?" she said. "After the consulting period, what do you actually want?" I thought about my father. His checkbook balanced by hand every Sunday. His careful, methodical, unannounced life. "Something that's mine," I said. "Something I built." She nodded. "Then let's build it." We were gone from Savannah by the following spring. New city, new start. Something we built together from the ground up, with no one else's name on the door. Gerald Whitmore retired quietly that autumn. No ceremony, no photograph in the lobby. Just a signature on a document and a building that had already moved on before he stood up to leave. I heard about it from Carol. I sent no message. I felt no particular triumph. What I felt was the very simple and deeply underrated feeling of a man who had been called sport for 6 years by someone who needed him small, and who had waited, patiently, for the truth to do what the truth always does. Find its own way into the room. Some men spend their whole lives building kingdoms. Gerald Whitmore built one for 40 years and lost it on a Thursday morning because he fired his son-in-law from Paris on a Friday the 13th, and couldn't finish the sentence before the line went dead. 6 years. One clause, one patient man, and a woman who had been keeping score since she was 12 years old and never once lost count. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Dad's True Revenge. Every week, real stories about patience, dignity, and the quiet satisfaction of letting the truth speak for itself. Drop a comment. Tell me what you thought. Tell me your story. And remember, the best revenge was never loud. It never is. See you next week.